Hey everybody, hope your day is going well so far. I wanted to go ahead and showcase one of my decks. This is I think like the first real time showing how I build my decks. So let's get into it. Also, Gracie says hi. So today's showcase is going to be Calamex, the Stormsire. Now, this is one of my favorite decks. It can win out of nowhere as Calamex does. Lots of instants, lots of damage. I think the coolest thing that I've done with this deck so far was deal, I think, about 1400. That's 1,400 points of commander damage in one swing. Hence, my buddies and I called it Yu-Gi-Oh damage, and that's inspired one of the memes that I made. If you know what I'm talking about here. In all my decks, I try to keep each of the corresponding fetch lands, each of the corresponding shock lands, each of those corresponding check lands, with minor variances for utility lands depending on whatever that deck needs. As far as utility goes, we've got Kessig Wolfrun, we've got Treasure Vault, and we've got a Command Beacon. Alright, so Calamex wants to get in for damage. The best way to do that is to trample or to just go through your opponent. Whenever you cast instants, he gets bigger, and whenever he's tapped, whenever you cast your first instant, you copy it. Now, one thing to note is that first instant spell is each turn, so while he swings in on your turn, on your opponent's turn, for that full rotation back until your turn, he's tapped, which means that's a whole nother 2 to 3 other turns, depending on how big your pot is, of doubling spells, which is pretty sick. So here we've got some artifacts, we've got a lot of instants, we've got only a handful of sorceries, and just a few enchantments. And of course we've got a little bit of creatures, but that's not important. Now, in all honesty, this deck can get out of hand pretty quick, but by my standards, it's pretty jank. I feel like that I put a lot of cards in here that are just fun, but in a weird way kind of hold the deck back from being as efficient as it could be. But here are a couple of my favorite combos. So we've got Dryad's Favor, which allows me to enchant my creature, giving it Forest Walk. We've also got Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth, making every land a forest, making my commander unblockable. Now for the instants, we've got Invigorating Surge, which doubles the counters on them, which is nuts. In a lot of my decks, I try to run efficient, free-to-cast spells by giving alternate costs. Like this one, if I control a forest, opponent gains 3 life, but my creature gets +4/+4. So when you're dealing with commander damage, gaining 3 life doesn't really do much for your opponent. I've got Beacon of Destruction for a quick 5 damage to anything, and then copying it as well. We've got Frantic Search, which is an all-star in this deck, because you can draw, discard 2, untap 3 lands, and then in response to the copy, tap your other lands to just float a bunch of mana. Very stupid. We've got Simic Charm to buff up and also give hexproof, or in case we're on the defensive, bounce a bunch of creatures, leaving an opening for our next turn. We've got Nature's Claim, very efficient destruction for artifacts and enchantments. Again, that 4 life doesn't mean a whole lot. We've got more bounce stuff with Depart the Realm. We've got Galvanic Iteration, which copying, uncopying. You better keep track of what you're doing with this deck. We've got this beautiful Opt. I really love that art. We've got Snap for some awesome tempo plays. The all-star of the deck, and the key card, Berserk, which is absolutely nutty. We've also got Unleash Fury, which doubles and gets really crazy really fast. Crop Rotation, sack a land as an additional cost, but with Calamex tapped, we get that effect twice without having to pay the cost twice. That's pretty efficient to me. Tarka's Command for some quick damage and extra land drops. This awesome looking Lightning Bolt. Unexpected Windfall, again, double effect, it's 1 time the cost. Arcane Denial, draw your cards, hopefully they help. And of course we got Deflecting Swat, because he's on the art, and I'll try to keep things flavorful. This has got to be my favorite art from the Mystical Archives. This Growth Spiral is so sick, and I'm glad that it's here. Extra draw, extra land drops. The Play Reward, Harrow. It doesn't have a text on it. If you have seen these before, you know what I'm talking about, but if you haven't, they released these cards way back. They don't do it now, but yeah, you just have to know the effects of these cards. Harrow, sacrifice land, get 2 basics onto the battlefield. Again, with Calamex, double the effect, 1 time the cost. We've got Dispel. I like to play hyper-specific cards if I'm doing counter spells, just to make it a little more fair for my opponents, and it kind of keeps me, keeps me in check on what I really want to focus on countering. Chord of Calling, whenever that gets copied, that gets out 2 really big monsters. Manamorphous, more tempo. Again, turn aside, probably one of my favorite counter spells. Play whatever you want, just don't touch my stuff. Gotta have a Chaos Warp. Shadow Rift, giving it Shadow and drawing an additional card. Pretty sweet. We've got Regrowth, which returns any card back to my hand, so I can recur a bunch of awesome instants. Blasphemous Act, because Calamex is usually a one-man band, and yeah, a lot of people like to play creatures. Now for the enchantments, we've got Wilderness Reclamation. Untap all my lands at my end step. Not as good as Seedborn Muse, but I can't wait to get one of those to put it in this deck. But until then, I'll untap my lands at my end step, that way I can use that mana during my opponent's turns to cast spells. And then we got Rhythm of the Wild and Fires of Yavimaya to give my creatures haste. And with Rhythm of the Wild also makes it to where they can't be countered and gives the flexibility of giving them a +1/+1 counter. Yeah, you can also sacrifice Fires to give it +2/+2. We've got your typical mana rocks as part of the mana ramping. We've also got Springleaf Drum, because Calamex isn't always going to be able to get through, but you still want to use him for his effect. So you tap this, tap him, get mana, and you can still double up your spells. Now it's also the same reason why I run Paradise Mantle. Twinning Staff for extra spell copying. And last but not least, the creatures. We've got Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath, Ragavan for some early value. Stormkiln Artist will make us a lot of treasure tokens and get big himself. Adrix and Nev, Twin Casters for extra treasure tokens. Varen, Voice of Duality, which will also help us copy spells and get out of hand really fast. Again, keep track of your triggers. Archmage Emeritus, which will let me draw cards, and with copying and casting, that's going to be a lot of cards to draw. Elder Gargaroth for some big beefiness. Gezaleth Prismari, that way all of my treasures can still be reused for our instants and sorceries. Jewel Royale, to make us a bunch of cat tokens for every time we draw a second card, which is going to happen pretty frequently. And then for some other beefy boys, we got Coma, Cosmos Serpent, and Old Gnawbone. Thank you guys for sticking around. People. Building a deck for somebody whenever I hit 1,000 followers, and so I'm showcasing my build style. So if you guys like it, that'll come into play at some point. Thank you guys.